The Maid of Orléans, Joan of Arc. She crowned a king, then he watched her burn.
On the morning of May 30, 1431, in the old market square of Rouen, Normandy, a 19-year-old girl was tied to a tall wooden pillar. As the English executioner lit the pyre beneath her, she did not recant her beliefs, curse her enemies, or beg for her life. Instead, she gazed at a wooden crucifix held high by a sympathetic priest and repeatedly called out the name of Jesus over the roaring flames. This was the brutal end of an astonishing, brief life that defied every social, military, and religious convention of the 15th century. How did an illiterate teenage peasant from a remote border village rise to command thousands of soldiers, crown a king, and alter the trajectory of a century-long war before her 20th birthday? The life of Joan of Arc is one of the most rigorously documented, fiercely debated, and endlessly captivating stories in human history. Jeanne d'Arc, universally known in the English-speaking world as Joan of Arc, was born around the year 1412 in the small farming village of Domrémy, located in the Duchy of Bar in northeastern France. A French national heroine and a canonized Catholic saint, she is primarily recognized for her role as a visionary military leader during the Lancastrian phase of the Hundred Years' War. Acting upon what she firmly believed to be divine revelation, Joan revitalized the demoralized French army, lifted the English siege of Orléans, and secured the coronation of the Dauphin, Charles VII. She is considered a figure of monumental historical influence because she successfully shifted the momentum of one of Europe's longest conflicts and forged an enduring sense of French national identity, proving that the course of nations could be redirected by a supposedly powerless, marginalized individual. Joan of Arc was born into a fractured, war-torn world. The Hundred Years' War had begun in 1337 as a dynastic dispute over the French throne between the ruling houses of England and France. By the time of Joan's birth, the French economy was devastated, and the kingdom was torn apart by a bitter civil war between two noble factions, the Armagnacs, who supported the French royal family, and the Burgundians, who allied with the English. Joan's parents, Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle Romee, were relatively prosperous peasant farmers who owned roughly 20 hectares, 50 acres of land. Her father supplemented the family income by working as a minor village official, collecting local taxes and overseeing the town watch. Joan received no formal education and never learned to read or write. Instead, she spent her childhood spinning wool, tending to livestock, and learning Catholic prayers from her mother. Though the date of January 6, 1412 is often cited by later biographers as her birthday, based on a 1429 letter by a royal councillor, Joan herself testified at her trial that she did not know her exact age or the precise date of her birth. Her early years were marked by the terrifying realities of war, as Domrémy was occasionally raided by Burgundian mercenaries, forcing the villagers to flee and watch their homes burn. The central defining influence of Joan's life began in the summer of 1425, when she was approximately 13.5 years old. While working in her father's garden, she experienced what she described as a profound mystical encounter. According to her later sworn testimony, she saw a brilliant light and heard a voice that she identified as belonging to Saint Michael the Archangel, the patron saint of the French royal family. Over the next few years, these visions expanded to include Saint Catherine of Alexandria and Saint Margaret of Antioch. Initially, these voices merely instructed her to govern her conduct, attend church, and maintain her personal piety. However, by May 1428, as the military situation for the French Dauphin grew increasingly desperate, the voices became urgent and specific. They commanded the young girl to leave her home, travel into hostile territory, and fulfill an impossible mission: raise the siege of Orléans, drive the English out of France, and escort Charles VII to the city of Reims for his formal consecration. Joan's absolute, unwavering conviction that these instructions were handed down directly from God became the driving force of her life, making her impervious to doubt, fear, and the intense ridicule she would soon face. Transitioning from a quiet village life to the center of French politics required immense audacity. In 1428, the 16-year-old Joan traveled to the nearby town of Vaucouleurs to petition the local garrison commander, Robert de Baudricourt, for an armed escort to the royal court. Unsurprisingly, the hardened military veteran laughed at the peasant girl and sent her home. Refusing to accept defeat, Joan returned to Vaucouleurs in January 1429. This time, her passionate conviction won over two young soldiers, Jean de Metz and Bertrand de Poulengy, who were struck by her profound piety and absolute confidence. Convinced by her growing local support and her seemingly prophetic knowledge of a recent French military defeat, Baudricourt finally relented. He provided Joan with a horse, a sword, and an escort of 6 men. To protect herself while traveling through enemy Burgundian territory, Joan cut her hair short and dressed in men's clothing, a practical, defensive decision that would later be used against her in her trial. After a grueling 11-day journey covering roughly 270 miles, she arrived at the Dauphin's court in Chinon in late February or early March 1429. Impressed by her uncanny ability to identify him in a crowd and her private revelation of a secret known only to him, Charles VII sent her to the city of Poitiers for 3 weeks to be strictly examined by prominent theologians. In April 1429, the clerics concluded that they found nothing but humility, honesty, and simplicity in her, officially sanctioning her mission. Joan's breakthrough moment, the event that transformed her from a religious curiosity into a legendary leader, was the lifting of the siege of Orléans. By April 1429, the city of Orléans, a crucial strategic stronghold on the Loire River, had been under English siege for 7 months. The city was on the verge of starvation, and the French forces were entirely demoralized. Joan arrived at the outskirts of Orléans on April 29, 1429, bringing desperately needed supplies and a small relief army. Clad in custom-made white armor and carrying a distinctive banner depicting God and 2 angels, she immediately clashed with the cautious French generals who wanted to wait for further reinforcements. Bypassing the war council, Joan rallied the troops and city militias, leading a series of aggressive frontal assaults against the heavily fortified English positions. Between May 4 and May 7th, the French captured several key English fortresses. During the fierce assault on Les Tourelles on May 7th, Joan was struck in the shoulder by an English arrow. Against all expectations, she pulled the arrow out herself, returned to the front lines, and inspired her men to a decisive victory. On May 8, 1429, the English abandoned the siege and retreated. A deadlock that had lasted for over 200 days was broken by a 17-year-old girl in just 9 days. Following the miraculous victory at Orléans, Joan forcefully urged the cautious Charles VII to capitalize on the momentum. Under her inspiration, the French army embarked on a rapid and highly successful offensive known as the Loire Campaign. June 11–12, 1429, Joan led the French army to capture the town of Jargeau, where she survived a stone projectile that struck her helmet as she scaled the town walls. June 15–17, 1429, French forces quickly reclaimed the towns of Meung-sur-Loire and Burgundians, wiping out English strongholds in the region. June 18, 1429, at the Battle of Patay, the French vanguard caught the retreating English army off guard, decimating their forces and capturing their top commanders. It was a crushing, overwhelming victory that wiped out the English military elite. July 17, 1429, having cleared a path through hostile territory, the French army arrived at Reims. Charles VII was officially crowned King of France in the Grand Cathedral, with Joan standing proudly by his side holding her banner. May 23, 1430, after a series of political delays and a failed assault on Paris, Joan travelled to defend the town of Compiègne from a Burgundian siege. During a skirmish outside the city walls, she was pulled from her horse and captured by Burgundian troops, ending her brief but explosive military career. Joan of Arc became internationally famous because her story was unprecedented and seemingly impossible to explain without invoking the supernatural. The medieval world was strictly hierarchical and patriarchal. Women, particularly impoverished peasant women, had no political voice and were explicitly barred from military command. Yet Joan bypassed the entire social order. Her fame rested upon the synthesis of her undeniable military success and her fierce spiritual claims. When she dictated letters to the King of England demanding that he surrender the keys of all the good towns you have taken and violated in France, the English dismissed her as a heretic and a witch. However, as she systematically dismantled their armies, her reputation terrified her enemies and electrified her countrymen. The rapid circulation of pamphlets, poems, and letters throughout Europe turned her into a living legend. Culturally, she became a symbol of divine justice, a pure, uncorrupted peasant, empowered by God to punish the pride and greed of the English invaders. To understand Joan is to understand her profound, unyielding religious devotion. She was motivated entirely by her voices, which she believed carried the unquestionable will of God. This divine certainty made her incredibly stubborn. She frequently lost her temper with cautious noblemen, swearing at them to stop talking and start fighting. She favored rapid, decisive, and highly aggressive military action over diplomacy or defensive strategies. Despite her military role, she was profoundly compassionate. She testified that she never personally killed an enemy soldier, preferring to carry her banner in battle rather than a weapon. She wept over the English casualties at Orléans and insisted that captured enemies be treated humanely, frequently confessing dying soldiers on the battlefield. Joan was also fiercely devoted to her own purity. Both her allies and her captors noted her strict adherence to chastity. Male companions who slept near her in military encampments swore under oath that they never felt any sexual attraction to her, attributing this to an aura of profound holiness that surrounded her. She was a creature of immense discipline, fasting frequently and insisting that her soldiers stop swearing, attend mass, and expel prostitutes from their camps. Joan's career, while spectacularly successful, was not without grave failures and intense controversy. Her belief in her own divine infallibility sometimes led to strategic disasters. In September 1429, against the advice of several commanders, she launched a desperate assault on the heavily fortified city of Paris. The attack failed miserably. Joan was wounded in the thigh by a crossbow bolt, and the king ordered a humiliating retreat. However, her most agonizing conflict occurred during her condemnation trial in Rouen. Sold to the English by her Burgundian captors for 10,000 livres, Joan was put on trial for heresy in January 1431 by a politically motivated ecclesiastical court led by Pierre Cauchon, the pro-English Bishop of Beauvoir. For over 4.5 months, she was subjected to grueling interrogations by dozens of highly educated theologians. She was denied legal counsel, kept in a secular military prison guarded by hostile English soldiers, and chained to her bed. Her judges sought to trap her in complex theological questions, but the uneducated girl frequently outwitted them. When asked a trick question, whether she knew she was in God's grace, she famously replied, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." Unable to prove genuine heresy, the court ultimately condemned her on a technicality regarding her refusal to stop wearing male clothing, which she kept on in prison to protect herself from sexual assault by her guards. Joan's impact on the history of Western Europe was massive, reshaping both the geopolitical landscape and the psychological state of her nation. In the short term, her victories in the Loire Valley broke the myth of English invincibility and permanently crippled the English momentum in the Hundred Years' War. By ensuring the legitimate coronation of Charles VII, she ended the dynastic dispute that had paralyzed France. Though she died in 1431, the fire she ignited continued to burn. Over the next 2 decades, the reinvigorated French armies adopted her aggressive tactics and gradually pushed the English out of the continent, culminating in the final French victory at the Battle of Castillon in 1453. In 1456, a papal inquisitor general conducted a posthumous retrial, the nullification trial. After interviewing 115 witnesses who had known Joan, the court declared her original trial corrupt and unjust, officially clearing her name and declaring her an innocent martyr. Today, Joan of Arc's legacy is towering. She was officially canonized as a saint by Pope Benedict XV on May 16, 1920, and is venerated as one of the secondary patron saints of France. There are over 20,000 books about her housed in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and she has been the subject of countless films, plays, and artworks. Her image has been adopted by an incredibly diverse range of movements. She has been claimed by French nationalists as the ultimate patriot, by feminists as an early icon of female empowerment and resistance against patriarchal authority, and by Catholics as a paragon of holy obedience. During both World War I and World War II, her image was heavily utilized in Allied propaganda to inspire resistance against occupying forces. While historians still debate the exact nature of her visions, ranging from genuine religious phenomena to modern diagnoses of temporal lobe epilepsy or schizophrenia, her measurable historical achievements remain undisputed. She remains a symbol of defiance against impossible odds. The life of Joan of Arc is a testament to the profound, unpredictable power of human conviction. She stepped into a brutal, cynical war dominated by wealthy, heavily armed men, and she conquered it armed with nothing but an absolute belief in her purpose. Her brief 19 years on Earth revealed that history is not always dictated by economics, royal bloodlines, or superior technology. Sometimes it is bent to the will of a single, unyielding individual. Though her enemies burned her body to ashes and threw them into the Seine to erase her memory, they only succeeded in making her immortal. Joan of Arc remains an eternal reminder that courage, when married to an unbreakable sense of purpose, can alter the entire course of human history.